The autumn afternoon light filtered through the slats of the shutters, casting stripes of golden light over the collection of medical books that Margaret Cooper kept in her study. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced over the titles, while her mind was elsewhere, reviewing the difficult diagnosis she had given that morning. At 45, Margaret bore on her face the marks of a life dedicated to others, small wrinkles around her eyes that deepened when she smiled at a nervous patient, an attentive gaze that seemed to see beyond the words spoken. Her brown hair with premature grey streaks was tied up in a casual bun. She often joked that each white strand had a name and surname. Some belonged to difficult patients, others to sleepless nights with baby Emma, and a few, very few, to the rare arguments with Thomas over 20 years of marriage. "Mum, I'm going to need Dad's study for the science project." Emma burst into the room with the typical energy of her 16 years, a cell phone in one hand and a notebook in the other. "Can I use his drawing table space? I promise not to mess up his projects." Margaret smiled at her daughter. Emma had her father's piercing eyes and her mother's methodical determination, a combination that resulted in a strong, sometimes challenging but fundamentally kind personality. "Of course, dear. Your father mentioned he would finish the current project on Thursday. We'll organise the space for you." Thomas Cooper was a respected architect in the community, known for his sustainable house designs and public spaces meant to promote well-being. At 48, he maintained the same enthusiasm as when they first met. Margaret still remembered how he animatedly gestured when talking about natural light and the flow of people during their first meeting. The condominium where they lived was in a quiet residential area, with tree-lined streets and neighbours who exchanged greetings and occasionally gathered for small celebrations. The two-storey house had been renovated by Thomas himself years ago, transforming it from a traditional building into a space full of light and harmony. On Saturday, with Thomas attending an architecture conference in another city, Margaret decided to get a head start on organising his office. It was a cosy room, with a large drafting table by the window and walls lined with shelves full of architecture books, models, and objects collected from travels. "We could take this opportunity to clean out that junk drawer Dad never lets us touch," said Emma, already pulling on the handle of the bottom drawer of the metal file cabinet. "Wait, Emma. Your father is very organised and doesn't like it when—" Too late. The drawer was already partially open, revealing a meticulously organised collection of keepsakes, concert tickets, old maps, small travel souvenirs. Margaret sighed and decided that they could at least arrange the contents to free up more space. That's when Emma pulled an olive-green folder from the back of the drawer. "What is this? It seems important," she said, handing the folder to her mother. Margaret opened the elastic closure and found old documents carefully preserved. Among them, an official paper immediately caught her attention. It bore the seal of the Civil Registry Office and a title in formal lettering, "Marriage Certificate." Her heart involuntarily quickened as her eyes scanned the document. Thomas Cooper, yes, was the bridegroom's name. But where her own name as the bride should be, it clearly read, Sophia Grace Williams. The date, 25 years ago, 5 years before their wedding. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. Her vision blurred slightly at the edges. "Mum, are you okay?" Emma's voice sounded distant. "Yes." Margaret quickly closed the document. "Just some old papers. Let's keep tidying up, but set this folder aside. Your father must keep it for some reason." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of mechanical activities. Margaret maintained a facade of normalcy, but her mind worked incessantly, as it did when she was trying to find connections between seemingly unrelated symptoms of a mysterious patient. Thomas, married, before her, to a woman named Sophia. Never, in 20 years of living together, had he mentioned a previous marriage. The following days were an exercise in self-control for Margaret. As a doctor, she had learned not to jump to conclusions without all the information. She observed Thomas with new eyes when he returned from the conference, looking for signs, hints, any clue about this secret he had kept for so many years. He remained the same. Attentive, sometimes distracted, enthusiastic about his new project, helping Emma with math after dinner. During a video conference with a client on Tuesday, Margaret heard him mention, "my wife," with the same pride as always. No sign that he was in contact with someone else. At night, while Thomas slept, Margaret searched the internet for any information about Sophia Grace Williams. She found almost nothing relevant. A few namesakes on social networks, none with an apparent connection to Thomas. The certificate seemed legitimate. But why the silence about something so significant? Margaret spent the week balancing her work at the clinic, normal family life, and this silent investigation she was conducting. Her medical training helped her stay calm. She had learned that alarming symptoms often had simple explanations. But she also knew that sometimes they were the first sign of something serious. On Thursday evening, Thomas commented offhandedly during dinner, "Emma mentioned that you all organised my office. I hope you didn't mess up my chaotic but functional filing system," Thomas joked. Margaret noticed a slight tone of concern in his voice. Was it guilt? "We didn't touch anything important," she replied, studying his reaction. "We just made some space for her project." Thomas smiled with visible relief, and Margaret felt a pang in her chest. 20 years together, and now there was this shadow between them. On the following Saturday, with Emma at a school choir rehearsal, Margaret finally gathered the courage to confront the situation. She waited until Thomas finished watering the plants in the indoor garden, a Saturday ritual he particularly enjoyed. "Thomas," she began, sitting on the living room sofa and indicating the spot next to her. "I found something when we were organising your office." She placed the marriage certificate on the coffee table. Thomas looked at the document, and Margaret closely observed his reaction. First came surprise. His eyebrows raised and his eyes widened. Then, something unexpected. Not panic or guilt, but an expression of understanding, almost like a revelation. "Oh," he simply said, sitting down beside her. "You found it." "Yes." Margaret kept her voice calm despite her racing heart. "In 20 years together, you never mentioned that you were married before." Thomas took the certificate, running his thumb over the surface of the paper as if establishing a connection with something distant. "Because it wasn't a marriage in the sense you're thinking," he began. His voice was soft, not loaded with defensiveness, but with an old sadness. "Sophia was my second cousin." Margaret blinked, confused. "Your cousin?" Thomas nodded slowly, his gaze lost in memories. "Sophia was diagnosed with a rare type of leukemia when we were 23 years old. She didn't have adequate health insurance, and there was an experimental treatment that could save her." He paused, taking a deep breath. The treatment was too expensive for her family to afford, and the health plans didn't cover it because it was experimental. But my job at the time offered an excellent health plan that covered dependents, including spouses. Margaret began to understand. "So you got married so she could have access to the treatment?" Thomas nodded, his eyes misty. "It was my uncle's idea. Actually, it was just a family arrangement. We were friends since childhood, but there was never anything romantic between us." He smiled sadly. "We signed the papers and I accompanied her for the treatment. She was hospitalized for 6 months." "And then?" Margaret asked softly. Thomas's face contorted with the pain of the memory. "The treatment didn't work. She passed away a few days after we completed 6 months of marriage." He made air quotes as he said the word. "I kept the certificate as a memento of the last gesture I could do for her." Margaret felt a surge of complex emotions, relief, compassion, and a twinge of guilt for having doubted him. "Why did you never tell me this?" Thomas looked at her, his eyes sincere and vulnerable. "In the beginning, when we met, it seemed like a very heavy topic to bring up. Later, as we got closer, I feared it would sound like, I don't know, as if I were using the story to portray myself as some kind of selfless hero." He shook his head. And over time it became harder to mention, like explaining why I kept it a secret for so long about something that, in fact, helped me understand what truly matters in life. The following week, the Cooper family created a small memorial for Sophia in the backyard, a wooden bench next to a bush of blue hydrangeas, her favourite according to Thomas. Emma, touched by the story, helped choose a simple plaque that read only, "Sophia, kindness remains." During the small family ritual to inaugurate the memorial, Thomas shared some childhood stories with Sophia, how they played during hot summers at their grandparents' house, how she always defended stray animals, her dream of becoming a veterinarian. "I wish I had known her," Emma said, sitting between her parents on the new bench. "She seems like she was a special person." "She was," Thomas smiled, wrapping his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "And she would have loved to meet you." After Emma went inside to finish a school assignment, Thomas turned to Margaret and said, "There is one more thing I need to show you." In the office, Thomas opened the same drawer from where the certificate had come and took out an envelope yellowed with age. Inside were some old photographs, Thomas much younger alongside a woman with dark hair and a bright smile, and a letter folded carefully. "This was the last letter Sophia wrote a few days before she passed away," Thomas explained, handing it to Margaret. "She asked me to only read it after she was gone." Carefully, Margaret unfolded the paper and began to read the delicate handwriting. "Dear Thomas, by the time you read this, I will have already left. I do not want these to be words of sorrow, but of profound gratitude. What you did for me goes far beyond the official certificate we signed. It was an act of true love, the kind of love Jesus taught when he spoke about loving one another. I remember the pastor saying in a sermon, 'Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins.' Your family's love has covered my anguish in these last few months and brought me peace. I have one last request, if it's not too much to ask. I know that one day you will find someone special and build a wonderful family. If someday you have a daughter, I would like you to consider naming her Emma. It was the name of my little sister who passed away when we were children. She was only 4 years old. It would be a way to keep something beautiful from our family alive. Of course, this is just a suggestion. Your life will move forward as it should, and I will be eternally grateful to have been a part of it, even if only briefly in this way. With love and gratitude, Sophia." Margaret looked up from the letter astonished. Emma. Her daughter bore a name with a meaning she had never imagined. Why did you never say anything about the name?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. "When Emma was born and we were discussing names, I suggested Emma because I genuinely liked the name. But I was afraid that if I told you about the letter, it would seem like I was manipulating your decision using Sophia's story. It would be as if I were forcing you into a choice out of pity or obligation." He held Margaret's hands. "I wanted it to be a free decision. Ours. When you liked the name, it seemed, I don't know, like a circle closing in some way." Margaret felt silent tears stream down her face. All those weeks of doubts and fears now seemed so distant. "I think we should tell Emma," she finally said. "She has the right to know the special meaning of her name." That night, sitting by the memorial in the garden, they shared the letter with Emma. The teenager listened in silence, her eyes fixed on the delicate handwriting on the yellowed paper. "So, my name is a tribute?" she asked when they finished reading. "In a way it is," replied Thomas. "But it's also your own name. You've made it yours with everything that you are." Emma remained silent for a few moments, processing the information. "You know," she finally said, "in literature class we're studying how names can carry stories and meanings. It makes my name feel special, like I have a responsibility." "What responsibility do you think that might be?" Margaret asked gently. Emma looked at the memorial and then at her parents. "To live a name that means love," she smiled. "To continue this story." Thomas hugged his daughter, and Margaret joined the embrace. Under the sky that was beginning to show the first stars of the night, the three remained united, not just by blood ties or official documents, but by a love story that had begun long before they met. What Margaret had feared to be a painful secret turned out to be a legacy of compassion, a past act of love that continued to shine its light on the present, shaping who they were as a family and illuminating the path they would walk together. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.